a small-town baseball field in Progreso, Coahuila, in northern Mexico. The afternoon of the 7th of October, 2012. An amateur game is underway under the northern sun. Some spectators watch from improvised stands. Others watch from inside vehicles parked near the field. In one of those vehicles, a white double-cabin pickup truck, sits a man who, by every appearance, is simply a fan enjoying a Sunday afternoon. He is not. Beside him, according to the official report later issued by the Mexican Navy, are heavy weapons. And the man himself is, at that moment, the most wanted figure in the most feared criminal organization in the country. The founder and commander of an army of traffickers built from former Special Forces soldiers. The United States has offered $5 million for information leading to his capture. He has come to watch baseball with almost no protection. 1 or 2 escorts, no convoy, no perimeter. For a man who built his entire reputation on military discipline, it is a stunning lapse, and within minutes, it will cost him his life. An anonymous phone call has already told the Mexican Navy exactly where he is. When the Marines arrive, the game stops. There is a brief exchange of fire. And when it ends, the commander of the most militarized cartel in the history of Mexico is dead, on the ground, betrayed, almost certainly, by someone inside his own organization. This is the story of that organization. Los Zetas, the cartel that did not just compete in the Mexican drug trade, it changed it, permanently. The cartel that took organized crime in Mexico and made it more militarized, more brutal, and more predatory than it had ever been before, in ways the entire country is still living with today. But more than that, it is the story of the war that raged inside it, a war between the 2 men who shared its command, a war of betrayal that decided the cartel's future on a baseball field in Coahuila. And that ended more than a decade later, with one of them sitting in an American courtroom, facing the possibility of the death penalty. To understand the man on that baseball field and the organization he led, we have to go back to where the Zetas came from and to the moment they became something no one had intended. Los Zetas were not born as a cartel. They were born as a guard. In the late 1990s, the leader of the Gulf Cartel, a man known as the Friend Killer, recruited a group of deserters from the elite ranks of the Mexican military to serve as his personal security. These were not ordinary gunmen. They were trained soldiers, schooled in weapons, tactics, and small unit warfare. Drawn from an Air Mobile Special Forces unit, they kept their military radio codes. They numbered themselves internally Z-1, Z2, Z3, and they took a name that would soon become a synonym for terror across Mexico. That is a story in its own right, the story of the man who created them, and of how his ambition built the very thing that would one day destroy his organization. For now, what matters is what happened after their creator was captured and then extradited to the United States. Because in 2010, with their original master gone, Los Zetas did something that reshaped the entire landscape of Mexican crime. They broke free. They split from the Gulf Cartel and became an independent organization, a cartel of their own. And in doing so, they brought to the wider world of organized crime something it had never fully possessed before. They brought the methods of an army. This is the first way Los Zetas changed Mexico, and it is the most important. Before them, the Mexican cartels were, for the most part, organizations of traffickers' networks built around moving product, protected by hired enforcers and corrupt officials, generally preferring quiet arrangements to open war. Los Zetas were different at their very core. They had been soldiers. They thought like soldiers. They organized territory like a military occupation, used coordinated tactics, set up checkpoints and patrols, deployed heavy weapons, and treated confrontation not as a last resort, but as a tool. And because they were so effective at it, they forced everyone else to follow. To survive against the Zetas, rival cartels had to militarize too. They had to arm themselves more heavily, organize more like armies, and match a level of violence that had previously been the exception. The Sinaloa cartel formed its own armed wings in response. The Zetas raised the floor of brutality for the entire country. After them, there was no going back. The second way they changed Mexico was in how they made their money. For decades, the Mexican cartels had earned their fortunes almost entirely from one thing: trafficking drugs into the United States. Los Zetas pioneered something far broader, and for ordinary people, far more dangerous. Under their model, driven in large part by one specific commander, we will come to shortly, the organization systematized extortion. It demanded protection payments from businesses, from farmers, from migrants passing through, from ordinary commerce across the territories it controlled. It expanded into kidnapping, fuel theft, and the smuggling of people. It treated the population itself as a revenue source. This was a profound and terrible shift. A cartel that traffics drugs harms the people who use those drugs and the rivals it fights. A cartel that extorts and preys on the general population harms everyone within its reach. Los Zetas turned whole regions of Mexico into territories under criminal taxation, where ordinary people paid or suffered the consequences. And once again, the model spread. Other organizations adopted it. The predatory cartel, feeding not just on the drug trade, but on the population it controlled, became a permanent feature of Mexican organized crime. The third way they changed Mexico was through expansion. The Zetas did not grow the way older cartels had, slowly consolidating a home region. They expanded with the speed of a military campaign, pushing into new territories across Mexico and even beyond its borders, into parts of Central America such as Guatemala, where they recruited and trained. They built a model that could be franchised local cells operating under the Zetas' name and methods, spreading the organization's reach far faster than any traditional cartel structure allowed. And they wielded fear so deliberately that the reputation alone often did the work of enforcement. That reputation became a kind of brand, a tool of control through terror. It is not something to describe in detail, and we will not. But it is impossible to tell the story of how this organization changed the country without acknowledging that the fear it generated was, itself, a strategy, and a horrifyingly effective one. Militarization, predation on the population, rapid franchised expansion built on terror. These things, taken together, are why Los Zetas are remembered not merely as one cartel among many, but as the organization that changed what organized crime in Mexico fundamentally was. But an organization is run by people. And at the top of Los Zetas, in the years after they broke free, were two men whose rivalry would decide everything. The first was the commander, the man who would die on that baseball field. He was one of the original founders, a former elite soldier, disciplined and strategic, and he carried the internal designation Z3. For him, Los Zetas were an armed organization with a code, inherited from the military he had left behind. He preferred operations with a clear purpose. He worried that excessive, attention-drawing violence would bring the full weight of the state down on the organization. He believed, fundamentally, in discipline. The second man was different in every way. He had not been a soldier. He had begun his career by multiple accounts. As a lookout, a young man on the streets of a border city, reporting the movements of police and the army for the equivalent of a few dollars a shift. He was a civilian operator, brought into the organization long after it was founded. His internal number reflected that. Z40. Technically, a subordinate to Z3. But Z40 had something that propelled him past men who outranked him ahead for numbers, a memory for faces and routes, and an absolute willingness to carry out any order, no matter its nature. And it was Z40, more than anyone, who drove the organization's transformation into the predatory machine it became. It was under his command that the systematized extortion expanded across state after state. It was his model confrontation, expansion, terror, control of the population that came to define what Los Zetas were. For a time, the two men coexisted. The commander handled strategy from the mountainous regions he favored. Z40 ran the territory he knew best and built his power there. But as the organization grew and as their visions diverged, the tension between them hardened. The disciplined founder and the relentless operator. The soldier and the lookout. Two completely different ideas of what the cartel should be, sharing a single command that could not hold both of them forever. That tension expressed itself in the years around 2010 and 2011 in a series of events so extreme that they drew the full attention of the Mexican state events that, according to later investigations, were driven by Z40's command, and in some cases carried out without the authorization of the commander above him. The first was in the municipality of San Fernando, in the state of Tamaulipas. In 2010, the bodies of 72 migrants from Central and South America were discovered at a single ranch in the region, people who had been traveling north toward the United States. Months later, in the spring of 2011, the discovery of clandestine graves in the same area pushed the toll far higher. The case became an international crisis, straining Mexico's relations with several Central American nations and concentrating global attention on Los Zetas. According to testimony that later surfaced in U.S. federal courts, the decision had been made along Z40's command line, without consulting the organization's commander, as part of a regional strategy against groups suspected of cooperating with rivals. The second event came in the spring of 2011, in the town of Allende, Coahuila, over several days. Much of the town was devastated. And according to civil organizations that documented the case, hundreds of people were reported missing. The motive, revealed years later in U.S. federal trials, was a personal act of retaliation by Zafirdo against operators he suspected of informing for U.S. drug enforcement, a suspicion never confirmed by conclusive evidence. The commander, according to investigative reporting, learned of the operation only after it was underway and was reportedly horrified not by the use of force, which he had authorized for years against rivals, but by the disproportionate scale and the unilateral decision to act on it. The third event came in August of 2011. In the major city of Monterrey, one of the most important economic centers in the country, a fire was set at a casino in broad daylight, and more than 50 people lost their lives inside. The apparent trigger had been the refusal of the establishment's owner to pay the protection demands the organization had imposed. The political reaction was immediate and national. The government declared days of mourning, and the Army and Navy launched coordinated operations against Los Zetas cells across multiple northern states. These are not events to dwell on in detail, and we will not. What matters for this story is the pattern. Again and again, the relentless operator launched operations of a scale and brutality that the disciplined commander would never have authorized operations that brought political and military pressure crashing down on the entire organization. For Z40, public, unmistakable examples were the price of maintaining a system built on extortion. If one business could refuse to pay and face no visible consequence, the whole system would collapse. The logic was coherent. It was also the exact opposite of everything the commander stood for. And as the gap between the two men widened, the organization itself began to divide. By the middle of 2012, according to U.S. intelligence, there were effectively two factions inside Los Zetas, one loyal to the original commander and the old military core, the other loyal to Z40 and the operators he had promoted. They were not yet at open war with each other, but they were no longer a single organization. Some operators loyal to the commander began to disappear. Others crossed over to Z40's faction in exchange for promotions and better routes. And within the organization, according to later reports, a growing number of people began to speak quietly about the possibility of a change at the very top. That was the situation when the commander went to watch baseball in Progreso. We began this story on that field. On the 7th of October, 2012, the white pickup, the heavy weapons, the anonymous call, the Marines, the brief exchange of fire, and the body on the ground. His identity was confirmed by fingerprints. But the story did not end there, and the details of what followed are among the strangest in the entire history of the organization. The body was taken to a funeral home in a nearby town. And that same night, before federal authorities could take official custody and conduct a full forensic examination, an armed group entered the funeral home, overpowered the owner, and took the body away. It was loaded into a vehicle and driven off into the night. It was never seen again. There was no full federal autopsy. There were no cross-checked DNA tests. The commander of the most feared cartel in Mexico had been killed, identified by fingerprints, and then erased, his body removed before the state could prove, beyond any doubt, that he was dead. For years afterward, the family mausoleum he had built for himself reportedly stood empty, and rumors drifted through the underworld that he had never died at all. The United States, lacking a verifiable body, was slow to formally close his file. The absence of that corpse became its own small legend. The man who would later admit to ordering the theft of the body was Z40, who, in the hours after the commander's death, assumed absolute control of Los Zetas in less than 24 hours. The transition was remarkably smooth for an organization that had just lost its historic leader. No visible disputes, no clashes between factions, no period of uncertainty. For the analysts who studied the case, that smoothness suggested something specific. It suggested that the man who inherited the cartel had been preparing for that moment for some time. And it raised the question that has hung over the organization ever since. Who, inside Los Zetas, told Mexican military intelligence exactly where to find the commander on a quiet Sunday in a small town with almost no protection? The answer has never been officially confirmed. But the timing, a private rift between the two leaders, followed within weeks by the death of one and the absolute ascension of the other, has led many to a single, uncomfortable conclusion about how Z40 reached the top. By betrayal? His reign at the top lasted only about 9 months. Under his absolute command, the organization held together for a time. The trafficking continued, the extortion continued. In some regions, the violence intensified, but the internal cohesion of the cartel never fully recovered from the way he had come to power. operators loyal to the dead commander, who had survived the internal purges, began to act with growing independence. Some sought protection elsewhere, and a smaller group, according to later reports, began to cooperate quietly with U.S. authorities. On the 15th of July, 2013, in the pre-dawn darkness, on a dirt road near the border city of Nuevo Laredo, Z40 was captured by elements of the Mexican Navy. He was traveling with only 2 other people, a large amount of cash, and a small number of weapons. No army, no convoy. The capture, as would later emerge, had been made possible by an internal informant, a person whose identity remains protected to this day, under a U.S. federal witness program. For the analysts who had spent years studying Los Zetas, the parallel was impossible to ignore. The man who had very likely inherited the cartel through an act of internal betrayal had himself been captured, just 9 months later, through an act of internal betrayal. The cycle had closed on itself, but the organization did not die with his capture. After Z40 was taken, his younger brother, who carried his own designation, Z42, assumed control. He was, by his own reported boasts, a figure of extraordinary violence, and he led the cartel until his own capture in early 2015 in a wealthy suburb of the city of Monterrey. With both brothers imprisoned, the unified organization fractured. The Trevino family, however, did not simply fade away. According to U.S. prosecutors, from within the Mexican prison system, the 2 brothers continued to direct operations, renaming the organization they ran. It became the Cartel del Noreste, the Northeast Cartel, or CDN, concentrated around Nuevo Laredo. And the leadership of that successor passed, for a time, to a nephew of the Trevino brothers, a man who was himself eventually captured, tried in the United States, and sentenced to multiple life terms for his role. The bloodline of the organization's leadership was being dismantled in American courtrooms, one member at a time. In February of 2025, the United States designated the Cartel del Noreste a foreign terrorist organization, formally naming it the direct successor to Los Zetas. And then came the reckoning that no one had expected. In that same month, under enormous pressure from the United States, which had been escalating its classification of and campaign against the Mexican cartels, Mexico transferred 29 high-level cartel figures across the border into American custody in a single, coordinated operation. Among them were some of the most significant names in the entire history of the Mexican drug trade. And among them were the 2 brothers who had once led Los Zetas. The men who had run the most militarized cartel in Mexican history were now in the custody of the country they had spent their lives sending drugs into. In the spring of 2025, the brothers were arraigned in a federal court in Washington on charges of running a continuing criminal enterprise that, according to the Department of Justice, involved multiple murder conspiracies. U.S. authorities described them as personally responsible for and directing dozens of killings. Both pleaded not guilty, and according to reporters present, both faced the possibility of the most severe penalty in the American system. As of this telling, the trial of the man, once known as Z40, is set for the middle of 2026. He has not been convicted of these U.S. charges. Under the American system, he is presumed innocent until that trial reaches its conclusion. But the stakes could not be higher. The lookout who rose to the absolute command of the most feared cartel in Mexico now sits in a cell in the United States, waiting for a jury of the country he targeted to decide his fate. And so we are left, as we so often are with these stories, with a set of questions that may never have clean answers. Who, inside Los Zetas, gave Mexican intelligence the location of the commander on that October afternoon in 2012? Who gave them the location of Z40 himself 9 months later on that dirt road? Was there any connection between the two operations? What forensic secret left with the body that was stolen from the funeral home and never recovered? And what will the witnesses cooperating with the United States reveal when the trial finally begins? Some of those answers may emerge in a Washington courtroom in the months ahead. Others, as so often happens in the history of organized crime in Mexico, may never come at all. What is certain is this: Los Zetas began as a guard, an army built to protect one man. They became something no one had intended, an independent cartel that took the entire Mexican underworld and remade it in their own image. They militarized organized crime, forcing every rival to become more like an army to survive. They turned whole populations into revenue, pioneering a predatory model that spread across the country. They expanded with the speed of a military campaign across Mexico and beyond, and they wielded fear so effectively that their reputation alone could govern the territories they held. They changed Mexico. That is not praise, it is the opposite. They made an already violent landscape more violent, more militarized, and more dangerous for ordinary people. And the country has never fully recovered from what they introduced. And in the end, the organization that ruled through force was undone by the one weapon it could not defend against. Not the army, not the government. Betrayal, but the quiet word passed to the right people. The location given up by someone trusted. The cycle that took the commander on a baseball field and then took the man who replaced him on a dirt road. 9 months apart. The cartel that taught Mexico to fear its discipline died of its own disloyalty. And the two brothers who carried it to its end now wait, in a country far from the border they once controlled, to learn how the story finishes. If this story showed you the hidden complexity behind the headlines, subscribe to Sleeping Crimes. Every week, we unravel the stories we need to understand, not to glorify crime, but to understand its real impact. Turn on notifications. We'll see you at the next crime.